So I realized something recently about The Last Jedi. So this is just gonna be very casual, you know, I've got a cup of tea, we're just gonna sit back and we're gonna talk about The Last Jedi because, quite frankly, I don't think anybody has been talking about The Last Jedi. That's really fucking hot. Okay. Cue.
The Resistance is dead. The war is over. And when I kill you, I will have killed the Last Jedi.
Amazing. Every word of what you just said was wrong.
Star Wars is without a doubt one of the most powerful franchises in entertainment today. A series made up of casting at the time unknown actors and breaking them into stardom. I think that's pretty cool. That's really awesome. And I can remember when The Force Awakens was coming out and the hype was insane. This was like an event, and one that despite never growing up with the franchise, I wanted to experience. And I did, and I felt Force Awakens was a great reintroduction to the series and would hook on board a whole new generation of fans. Albeit, I would be wrong if I said this movie didn't play it a little safe. The plot points from the first movie are pretty similar in Force Awakens. However, it was the new elements that really stuck with me. Creating an interesting new villain in Kylo Ren, the crisp cinematography, and the additions of Rey, Finn, and Poe as our new leads. You know, it felt good to be a Star Wars fan again. Then The Last Jedi came out. And oh boy. A lot of what we'll be talking about in this video is on the phrase perception versus reality, and how that applies to pretty much everything this movie represents. And I'm aware that reality is a weird thing to talk about in something like Star Wars, but hear me out. A lot of the film's marketing presented this as darker than The Force Awakens, featuring a depressed Luke Skywalker claiming the way of the Jedi has to end, an extremely intimidating Snoke showing off the true nature of his power, and a lingering question over whether our hero Rey will follow in the steps of Kylo Ren and turn to the dark side. However, that was our perception. The reality we got was actually a surprisingly uplifting film. We all expected this to be akin to The Empire Strikes Back, and Rian Johnson states that he knew that, and wanted to tell a different kind of story to flip our perception on our heads. The Force Awakens ended with a lingering shot of Rey giving the lightsaber back to Luke, and for 2 years we perceived what the follow-up to that would be. Would he take it back and train Rey? Would this be the inspiration he needed to come back and fight? No. In fact, it represents the reality of what he perceived as important before his perspectives changed, and he just throws it away. What he's doing here is walking away from the immense pressure that he's been trying to get over, and I think that's effectively done. For 2 years, we all theorized that Luke would swing back into action and be the badass we wanted him to be. We wanted him to do all these epic things, just like the characters do in our heads and in the expanded lore and everything else we make them do on Star Wars Battlefront. We wanted to see that. But Luke refuses. He doesn't want to be tied to what a previous version of himself would have done. And here, Rian Johnson makes us feel like Rey. The idea of legends is also a major theme in how the story plays out. After waking up, Finn is perceived as a legend by our new character Rose, and she soon discovers the reality that he wants to escape and help his friends. The look on her face tells us all we need to know about how she feels regarding the sudden drop in expectations, and not too dissimilar to being let down by a role model. And I should note, I've had that happen. Perception versus reality is also visually shown on Canto Bight, and from a look standpoint, it's perceived as a very glamorous and high-class area, but the reality is that it's built on abuse and lies, perhaps a commentary for how incredible structures are often made by overworked staff, and animals we perceive as beautiful are being abused for entertainment. I grew up in Dubai, so that was very familiar for me. Another way this is shown is through the origin of how Ben Solo became Kylo Ren. It's interesting that the way Rey learns this is through perspective, and a lot of the tragedy of Kylo's origin is built around perspective. At first, she perceives him as a monster for killing Han Solo. She soon sees the reality that he was just a scared child afraid for his life, and confused about where his place was in the world. much like Rey's journey about discovering the truth about her parents. And after learning this, she then perceives Luke as more villainous until he shares his reality of the situation, in that he admits he made a grave error in judgment and it cost him the relationship with his nephew and Leia and broke his status as a legendary Jedi Master, effectively humanizing him to a point. Rey's parents is another interesting point regarding the movie's theme. For ages we perceived that she would be related to a Skywalker or a Solo or someone else important. The reality is she's not. She's a nobody, and she has to accept that. I think what Rian Johnson is doing here is creating a commentary on the idea of heroes having to come from somewhere special. And whilst that can work, and it's been proven to work, even in this series, right now it's kind of an overused trope. By making Rey a nobody and still having her be a hero, that sends a message that it doesn't matter where you come from in the galaxy. What defines you as a hero or a villain depends on your actions, but more on that later. Let's talk about our villains for a second. After the events of the first movie, Kylo Ren is forced to strip away all of his former identity to become who he was meant to be, and it's left intentionally vague until the movie's conclusion. Supreme Leader Snoke has been built up by the fans to be this movie's answer to the Emperor, and for a majority of the movie he earns that. He's a powerful, threatening character who our heroes have a hard time overcoming. Hell, even our villain has a hard time overcoming. And I think it would have been easy to have him be our new Emperor figure. At least, that was my perception. Kylo's journey allows him to realize that Snoke is simply using him for his power, and his perception of Snoke from this wise leader soon fades as Kylo embraces the reality about him and uses his power to kill him. And no matter how you feel about the movie, I think we can all agree this action scene is pretty awesome. After I saw this, I had no idea where this movie was going, and my perceptions faded. Instead of trying to predict the next scene, I simply let Rian Johnson take me on a ride, and allowed myself to be surprised at the conclusion. The conclusion of this movie best represents the theme in regards to our characters' choices. Luke shows up in the final battle to assist, and we perceive that it's actually him doing all this great stuff, but the reality is, he's not actually there. True character is revealed in the choices you make under pressure, and in that moment, Kylo didn't hesitate to kill Luke. Thus, his choice backfires on him and reveals him as someone who can't let go of his perception and embrace the reality that his circumstances come from a simple misunderstanding. Here, he's also revealed his true nature and, in my eyes, cemented himself as the villain of the entire trilogy. I asked a good friend of mine what she thought of The Last Jedi, and keep in mind she's a much bigger Star Wars fan than I am.
There were things that I liked and didn't like about The Last Jedi. I'm not completely heartless, so let's start with the things that I liked. I still really like the cast. I think everyone's great. John Boyega, Daisy Ridley, Adam Driver, across the board, excellent actors, and really fit into the Star Wars universe. I thought that the first opening scene was super fun, despite it having obvious scientific questions that you could have about if the bombs could drop like that and stuff. I think this is Star Wars, and we have to go for the ride with things like that, so that didn't bother me. I also really enjoyed the final sequence with the salt planet. I thought that was exciting and fun and felt like Star Wars. The Kylo Ren and Rey team-up fight was possibly my favorite fight in a Star Wars movie. That was awesome from beginning to end. It didn't bother me with the Snoke stuff. I thought he was interesting too. It was completely exhilarating to me as a huge fan of practical effects to see them using that again like they did in The Force Awakens, particularly seeing the puppet Yoda, or the original Yoda with the voice and everything in this movie it brought a tear to my eye. And I completely agree with where you're coming from with taking the expectations that we had for this movie and turning them around and giving us something completely unexpected. for sure. It fell flat for me in certain areas with that. And now we're going to get into what I did not love about this movie. One of the things that stood out to me was the additions of all the new creatures, and while I thought some of them worked and I liked the reasons why they were there, I do think that they introduced too many of them. They definitely crossed a line with the blue milk titty monster. That one was completely unnecessary. I liked the porgs and the backstory with covering up the puffins because they didn't want to move them. They're really great. I have porgs merch because I think they're adorable. The nun type characters that were on the island were a little unnecessary for me. I could have done without them. I think they probably should have just stuck with the crystal foxes and the porgs on this one, especially with having like the Canto Bite sequence where they did have so many interesting people and creatures running around there. They went a little overboard with too many new creatures to the Star Wars universe. Speaking of the Canto Bite sequence, that really didn't work for me. I think it screwed up the pacing of the movie. I understand that they were trying to give Rose Tico something to do and a side quest, but a lot of the issues that I have with this film was that it lacked focus. It almost had too many storylines going on all at once, and eliminating this casino sequence or replacing it with something else could have benefited this movie in a huge way. I think they completely wasted Rose, who I was fond of, and I thought she was a really cute character when they introduced her. She ended up really not doing much. Like the Benicio del Toro stuff, could have completely gone without. I don't see why he was even in this movie, and it kind of wasted a great actor that they could have possibly put somewhere else. But who knows? Maybe they'll do something with it that ties into that in the third movie and change my mind. Speaking of characters that I really liked, but I think that they wasted, once again, Phasma is kind of just a throwaway character who's nothing but cool aesthetic, and we really only get one fight sequence against her, which felt like they were trying to redeem what we were missing in the first one, but that again didn't necessarily work for me, and I really wanted more from her. Gwendolyn Christie is amazing, and I would have loved to see this character be really interesting and fantastic, and instead it just kind of was like another Boba Fett type situation where she looks really cool, doesn't do much. As I said before, my major complaint about this one is the pacing issues. It felt weird, and I don't know if that's in the editing, if just reading the screenplay would feel different, but just the pacing was bizarre with this. I think that it was exciting at the beginning and at the end, and that the middle is kind of a jumbled mess of a bunch of stuff going on. It kind of felt like there were 50 ideas thrown out, and instead of just trying to focus on a few things that could have been really good, they picked too many ideas, and a lot kind of got lost in this mixed up, kind of weirdly paced plot they were trying to put together. It didn't really fit. It felt like too many puzzle pieces. I do appreciate that this one was funny, because I liked a lot in The Force Awakens that there was some humor. It makes it fun to go see a movie like that. But some of the humor definitely didn't land for me. I think that they need to be a little more selective about the jokes that they choose to use. And again, I feel like it's just too many. Like there's a lot of too much of stuff, too many creatures, too many jokes, too many plot lines. So some editing and pulling back a little could have benefited this movie in a huge way. And my biggest complaint of all is that this just didn't give me that Star Wars feeling. When I went to see Force Awakens, it was beautiful to me, and I understand that a lot of people say that it's like a recycled plot of the original trilogy, kind of mashed together, but I didn't care about that because it brought tears to my eyes to see a movie that just felt like I was really watching a Star Wars movie. And that's the biggest complaint that a lot of people have about the prequels trilogy, is that it didn't feel like Star Wars, and I was hoping that we were going to get that again in this movie, and it didn't. It almost felt more like the Star Trek movies that they've been doing recently, and while I like those, it doesn't give me that same feeling in my gut when I'm watching a Star Wars movie. It's just, it's not tangible exactly what I'm talking about, but you know it when you feel it, and this movie just didn't make me feel it.
Now I'm here, and I disagree.
You know what, I think that's completely fair, and whilst I don't necessarily agree with some of what you said, you never once felt the need to scream your opinions to make them heard. From your perspective, I can understand why you'd feel that way about this movie. And looking at new perspectives is crucial for me in wanting to learn to be a better storyteller. What I think we can ultimately take away from The Last Jedi is this. Some people love it. That's okay. Some people don't love it. That's also okay. But what has really bothered me about discussions regarding The Last Jedi is there really aren't any. For every post I see praising this film for its bold risks, there's about 1,000 other comments complaining about how it pushes agendas down our throats and turns something they loved into propaganda ridden with plot holes that conveniently they can't explain with much detail beyond "I didn't like it" or "it was dumb." For every post I see criticizing the film, there's 1,000 other comments calling those people out for being insecure man-children that can't let go of the past and don't want to embrace a future. It's like, no matter what side you fall on, someone's going to be screaming at you, telling you how wrong you are. It's exhausting. And that's not how film discussion should work. For this whole video, I've analyzed how the theme of the movie is incorporated into the narrative, but I haven't said a word about how I personally feel about it. If you want to know what I think about it, let's all do one simple thing. Discuss. Leave a comment below or tweet me, and let's talk about the movie, what we loved, what we didn't love, why we felt the way we did, and through different perspectives, we can share and grow our knowledge as film fans. That's the lesson here. My perception is that this video will encourage you to open up healthy debate about what you feel on this film. Maybe it will help bring us together and learn to understand why people feel a certain way without resorting to personal attacks. The reality? Well, that's your decision.